What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So I've been getting a ton of requests lately. How do you tie in the lemon wood duck wings? So the first thing I do is I want to make sure that these fibers are lined up. Okay, across here. Now they might have a little bit of an arch, but once you start pushing them together, they're the same length. So I'm going to make sure that I have that in place. Okay. Then I'm going to come in here in the middle and I'm just going to cut this little bit of stem out. We'll see if we can capture this here. Nope. Okay. Put my scissors in there. Cut out the rachis. Okay. So now sometimes if the feather isn't big enough, people will stack them or, whatever. We're not going to do that. We're just going to use the one single feather. So, in this position, you're going to grab it and you're going to fold it kind of. And we're going to make a taco here, right? So, I like to run it through my fingers. And my pointer finger is running with this gap here, the opening of the feather. And that's how we're going to kind of throw it over. Now once you do this enough times, you can pretty much grab the right length the first time. We're going to set it up, and we're going to just do a little pinch wrap here. Okay. Now a lot of people tie these differently. Also, you'll notice that I cut that off at an angle. The reason I did that is because now when I go over top of this, it's going to allow me to have a really nice taper. Okay. So the next step here, we're going to try to enlarge this a little bit. Come back just a hair. Okay, so now the next step, we're going to grab this and pull it back. And we're going to put a couple wraps in front of it. And that's going to start to stand it up there. Then what I like to do, it's easier to feel it than it is to see it, but you feel that you have the same amount on both sides, and I'm basically just dividing them here. Okay, now once I feel that I have about the same amount, I'm going to come over and I'm going to do an X wrap, like a figure 8. Then I'm going to come around. Now my thread is, I'm wrapping backwards. I'm counter wrapping my thread. Okay, take a couple wraps up, and you don't have to go really high up. A lot of times I see people, they go really high up. You don't have to do that. I also like to make sure that my thread is flat. So now that I'm here, I'm going to take 1 or 2 wraps just to lock everything in there, and then I'm still counter wrapping right here. Okay, I counter wrap on both sides. Some people might say, I don't do it that way. That is the way that I do it. Okay. And we're going to come back down the feather here. And we're just going to straighten everything up. So that's only half the battle. Okay. Now as you see, they're pretty alright there. But if you needed to bring them closer, you can put a little wrap around their base like that. Bring them a little closer. If you need to push one way, you can put wrap in front of it or behind of it, however you want to do it. Okay. So then our next step here, obviously, we're going to tie in a tail. So I'm basically going to tie this entire fly. And when I tie these Catskill style, I like to have the tail a little longer. Fortunately, these fibers are just the perfect length to where I don't really have to trim much. And when I do Catskill style, I like to have a little bit of a longer tail and a little bit of a longer hackle than what you typically see. Now again, as I mentioned, this is Catskill style, not a Catskill pattern, okay? So I am going to use Peccary, which is the javelina pig. That's what I'm going to use for my body here. And now, while I'm tying these, I'm always keeping body in mind, okay? So I'm going to make sure I have that to where it's going to line up perfectly with everything, and the taper of this body is very important. Now, Peccary is pretty thick. That's why I didn't come up and then come back down. Instead, I tied it in at the back. But we have a smooth enough base right there. So now we're going to just wrap this up. Also, sometimes with your tail, you might need to put a couple wraps underneath of it. Okay. So another important part here, I don't want to build a bunch of bulk. However, I do need to bring this stem up, because if you don't bring the stem all the way up, you're going to have a notch under there and it's going to make your hackle go all wonky. So I'm going to cut this off right at my index point, as you can see right there. Okay. Now I'm going to make sure my hackle is where I want it once again. Now, Catskill flies aren't, you don't really use much resin on Catskill, but if you wanted to put resin down at this point, you could add UV resin, whatever. So now I'm going to grab a feather that's going to be good for this. Now a lot of people, they will use a hackle gauge, and I use a hackle gauge as well. But sometimes when I'm trying to get that perfect hackle, I will just grab a feather and I'll leave it on the cape. And then I'm just going to come up from underneath and say, do I like the length of that feather? Alright? So I measured. It's a good length for me. That's exactly how I want it. And the cape that I'm using is a dyed barred brassy dun by Sideling Hill. And Sideling Hill got his chickens and stuff from Colin's Hackle Farm, which is, like a legendary place to get hackle. So the good thing about these is it's a high barbule count, but it also leaves room for sparseness. Now, I'm guilty of this as well. When tying Catskill flies, sometimes, you add way too much hackle. And that's not what you want to do here. So I'm going to take a wrap, and sometimes I take a wrap behind. It looks like the body's nice enough where I don't have to. Okay. Now, if you tie this on top, like I do here, that's very possible, but you're going to end up pulling this under, right? So the best thing that I find is to tie this on the bottom, and you'll notice I've stripped a couple extra fibers off, and I'm looking at the front of the feather, and on the right side there's a few barbs missing. So I'm going to just pull, and I want to have a little bit of bare stem as well. So again, index point, snip it off. Now I'm going to work my thread up. Now at this point, I'm going to make sure my wings are setting the way I want them to, and they are not, okay? So I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to adjust this wing a little bit. Just a little bit. Boom, perfect. Now, I've already made this head kind of fat, which is not good. However, for this demonstration, or whatever. So, a lot of times you can grab these wings and pull them forward, and you want about 2 or 3 wraps in the back, then 2 or 3 wraps in the front. Okay, now I'm going to back my thread. Just like that. Now, most of the time, you'll notice that Catskill tires do not come all the way up to the eye like I just did there. And like I said, man, I am no Catskill expert, that's for sure. However, I do know how to tie in the wings decent enough. And since I had requests to tie it my way, you know, that's what we're doing. So now I'm going to grab my whip finisher, make sure I have it right where I want it, and then sometimes you might have to weave it there. Now I can tell you right now, the head on this fly is way fat. Okay, you don't want to have a fat head on a fly like this. You just don't. However, you know, I'm not going to sit here and argue or cry over spilled milk, because a lot of times I make these videos and they're full of cuts and edits and everybody thinks that I'm just some incredible tyer. The fact of the matter is, I make mistakes all the time, and you get to see that showcased here.